Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are on our wonderful planet. And welcome to our very special May live stream. And this is titled AI Powered Managers. In the run up to today, it was quite interesting for us as a team. We had a lot of discussions about how to position this and message this, mainly because the topic, of course, of AI is so broad and so deep. And also, people are aware that they've been through so many conversations, probably, and many thoughts on this already. So we wanted to bring you something ultra special, super specific, super practical, and something that can make an impact for the world of the manager, like right now. If this is the first time you're ever joining one of our live streams, my name is Wayne Clark. I'm the founder of the World Class Manager team based here, I'd like to say in sunny London, but it's not that sunny right now. It's just normal and grey. And we like to try and bring you fresh content on a regular basis based on the learnings and things that we're picking up from our World Class Manager program. If you're new to this, then we've developed now around 250,000 managers in more countries around the world. And our focus is largely looking at the role of the manager and how can we optimize the organization, the team, and of course, the manager for ultimate success. So we spent a long time looking at what great managers do around the world, and where possible, we like to try and bring experts, content, ideas, thoughts, new innovations that are adding to this idea of how do we help to really power and empower the role of the manager. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce our guest this month, a guy called Hayk Hakobyan, who I met a number of months ago up in Manchester, actually, for the first time. And I was genuinely blown away by what him and his team have developed. He's going to unpack this and share a lot more. But I think for me, when we come across a lot of the new tech that's available, some amazing innovations that we come across, I'm slightly skeptical because it looks interesting, but how does it apply and add value to the role of the manager? So we're going to introduce Hayk, who, again, I'm absolutely delighted to bring in. And good afternoon to you, Hayk.
Hello. Hi, Wayne. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah,
Hi,
great to see.
everyone.
Great to see you too. And yeah, we met. I think it was probably about 6 months ago, initially,
Yeah, about here.
and then we spent some time last week in Luxor together in Egypt. So how that all came together is maybe we can share for another day. But it's yeah, great to spend some time with you last week, and also great to get to learn and understand a bit more about the business. So I'd love to maybe talk a little bit about your background as we introduce this, because I think, you know, when I look at your background in terms of your educational background, yeah, I mean, it blows me away. Nuclear physicist. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about your career journey, education background, and how you arrived at InsightGenie.
Great. Thanks a lot. I think, again, very excited to be here. Just quickly on my background. So I've studied physics all the way to the PhD level. And then afterwards, I dropped and started basically working in different companies and studying behavioral sciences. This is from around 2011. I taught myself, took some classes, and eventually started applying in different companies, mostly large companies across at the time in Egypt, in Mozambique, and eventually in Singapore. And at one point, I just formalized my advisory and started basically offering a more formal advice. So, and then also in terms of technical kind of knowledge, as I was studying nuclear physics, I have become a software developer. That's because that's what a lot of nuclear physicists, etc., have to be. You have to do coding and software development. So, and eventually developed expertise in AI, basically, which is also something I've been advising in since around the same time, 2011. So my background also has a part where outside of big companies, I started few other companies, few ventures of my own. I started 3 companies. 2 failed in Egypt, and the third one was in Mozambique, which was acqui-hired. And with that background, I eventually moved to Singapore, and there I was invited to be part of a large VC accelerator, which is called Orbit Startups. And within that context of being a mentor to startups in product, mostly in strategy, that's where the story of InsightGenie kind of begins, because my expertise is in behavioral sciences and AI. And I had, within a span of 6 months, I think, or so, a couple of startups that started asking me if there was at the time, they were asking about credit and kind of there is a comprehensive credit risk assessment. And I thought, okay, I'm doing behavioral sciences. It makes sense to assess someone from behavioral perspective. And that's kind of how the story started. Met my co-founder at the time, and we started basically what was initially in finance, and then very soon after, we started basically getting a request saying, you're doing behavioral assessment of people. Could this work for HR? And this is going to be the topic of today. So I'll share with you some stories and some insights of how we have been doing this quite successfully, and to a shock of a lot of companies that this is even possible to do, behavioral assessment of potential job candidates and employees.
Yeah, that was the thing that blew me away when we first met, was the idea of looking at the potential applications for a few different areas. One was the hiring process, I think, which many organizations is fraught with fragmentation and difficulty in how to select the right type of people for the right type of culture. We spent a long time looking at cultures that manage to, like any team, right? You can find a star player in one team, they move to another team, and they're not a star player anymore. Is the cultural fit right? Organizations struggle with it, HR teams struggle with it. And it would be wonderful if there was a way of finding a new mechanism to identify the right type of fit for the organization. So I think the hiring process is, fraught with challenges and ripe for innovation. I think the second area of looking at the role of the manager, so we've spent the last 10, 12 years probably now analyzing and working with hundreds of thousands of managers around the world. And we've often found that there are common traits of some of the best managers we come across. It's no surprise why certain managers manage to excel, why their teams are so effective. And again, there's probably a much smarter way of helping them to identify strengths in the organization, and of course helping the organization to identify great potential and future managers. I don't know, I don't want to sort of step on the toes of leadership assessments out there, but I've become tired, jaded, and slightly cynical, actually cynical, let's not say slightly cynical, of many of these assessments, because they're so subjective. Many of them are based on absolute pseudoscience, and it would be great to find another way to do it. And I think what you've developed has an opportunity to really disrupt that whole space. And then the third area I'd love to talk to you a little bit about is around optimizing teams. So again, how do we optimize the team for success? And I'm sure there's some applications of what you and the team have developed. So maybe we could kick off with the first one of looking at this challenge of hiring, bringing the right people into the organization. Perhaps you could talk to us a little bit about how we might optimize hiring and how this would actually and practically work using what you've developed.
Thanks a lot. And this is indeed, I think, a great kind of a point to talk about. I think, as you guys, a lot of you know, you don't have to be an HR expert to know that hiring processes, when you say it's not only inefficient, but it's just hugely wrongful in certain ways. There are a number of studies that basically show that people who land, even in companies such as Google, etc., Amazon, end up being basically in wrong positions. A good company like Google, etc., they will probably transfer you eventually, but the cost of basically getting someone wrong in a team, cost to the company and to the person, and then moving the person somewhere else, it's great, it's significant. So one longitudinal study, before I go into our solutions, I think one longitudinal study basically, if I recall correctly, quotes, and this is a 10-year study looking at around 1,000 companies globally, was that around 45.5% of people land in wrong positions. Imagine, so roughly half of the people, and this is including companies such as Google, Amazon, etc., which have 5 and sometimes up to 10, 15 interviews and kind of job assessments of candidates. And even then, you end up in the wrong position. Of course, for a smaller company or startup, of course, that can be catastrophic, landing, for example, a wrong VP, etc., right? So and like you said, I think the process is inefficient, but it's also, the word I want to use is subjective, right? It's by and large subjective. You, of course, can assess a CV, and for technical people, you can do some quiz or some sort of a problem that the technical person can potentially solve. But every other role, for example, marketing, social media, etc., it's very hard to really quantitatively or scientifically, or however you want to call it, really assess how good the person is, besides relying on some signals coming from either from CV or LinkedIn or some references. And all of those can be gamed. So that's the context. And then how we came to this was basically a couple of our financial clients were asking if they could recruit team members using this. And we were super skeptical. We thought sort of like recruitment. But then the pitch that they told us is the kind of pitch I use now, which is ironic. They said, well, I mean, you're assessing on behavior of people. Well, this is non-technical assessment of a job candidate is by and large behavioral assessment or personality assessment of a job fit or a culture fit. So could you guys do it? And we basically came up with a couple of models. We tested them. And now we basically, since a year and a half now, we opened it up to basically HR companies or larger companies that have basically HR departments. And the way we do this is basically by and large using voice assessment. So what we have done is we converted the science of voice prosody. Prosody is assessment of your larynx, the organ in your neck that produces the voice. So there's a lot of science that basically postulates that your voice basically reveals a lot about your character and your mental well-being. So what we have done is basically we've gone through some of the peer-reviewed articles, some of the science behind this, and we converted some of that, a lot of that, to some sort of technology. And when you convert this kind of science to technology, what it allows you to do, especially prosodic kind of analysis of voice, is basically to convert someone's voice. So if you speak like this, whether that's in an interview or at any other stage of a hiring process, after 30 seconds to a minute of just listening to you like that, and you can talk about anything you like, I'm able to assess everything from things such as your conscientiousness, your openness, your innovativeness, or your learning, etc. All the things that are intrinsically assessed while you're being interviewed or going through the hiring process. All of this can be technologically, or let's call it scientifically assessed using some sort of a technology. And that's what we did. And of course, also another thing is mental or overall well-being of a person, right? This is very important because a person can come from Google or Amazon, can have a shiny CV and shiny LinkedIn, but maybe jaded, maybe burned out, and he or she is not going to perform well, however amazing all the other profiles look like. So voice allows you to basically assess the mental well-being. So some of this is already there. You can assess mental well-being. You can see things such as, for example, stress level, depression. You can also see, eventually we'll come up with things such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. This is kind of in the pipeline.
Wow.
But you can see things such as impulsivity, emotional stability, all these things that have, again, you don't have to be a specialist, but large impact on how a candidate and eventually an employee is going to be performing in a specific job. So all of this from a 30-second to a minute of voice, completely independent of language and independent of context. So you can kind of imagine the implications of something like that. And the accuracy of this is between 80 to 90%. So it's highly accurate. It's not 100% because there's a lot of factors that can affect that. I'll spare you for now, but it's a lot more reliable and accurate compared to an HR manager or hiring manager's assessment that we currently have.
Well, and it's certainly better than the 45% of people that are the wrong fit for the organization.
Yeah, definitely much better.
And what about, I'm sure this has been raised many times with you, but what about some of the more ethical side of this? Like, is this the right or wrong thing to do? Because it kind of feels like the first time when I understood how the technology works and how you do it, it kind of felt to me like an episode of Black Mirror. Like this is like some far out voodoo stuff. What about that?
I love Black Mirror, by the way. Yeah, so the ethical part, this is a very pertinent question. So this is, if you like, in all transparency, it's a biometric assessment of people. But then think about it for a second. When you go, if you're, let's say, applying for a job and you're going through the process, every step of the way, doesn't matter if it's a technical or non-technical assessment of your capability, you are basically subjected to some sort of assessment, right? Interview itself is a process of assessment, right? All we are doing, and what happens is the person talks, right, to, let's say, a hiring manager or HR, and the HR assesses you based on what you said. And also from behavioral science and neurosciences, you guys probably know that a lot of the cases, an interviewee, there was a research recently that's done that basically says within 5 to 10 seconds of a job candidate entering an interview room, the hiring manager or the interviewer from HR already has a decision made subconsciously. Wow. So basically how you basically move your body language, etc., the voice tone, subjectively already register inside the person who is going to make that decision to hire you or move you forward or not. And whatever you say makes very little difference, right? So voice and body language are accounting for, if I recall correctly from the study, about 90% of the overall impression of you. Do you imagine? So what you say is maximum 10% in overall weightage of what you're going to be judged on. So super subjective, in other words, right? So here we come and say, instead of subjectivity, which is, again, people are prone to biases, to all kinds of shortcuts, mental shortcuts, here is a scientific way of assessing if this guy or this girl or this person actually fits and has specific characteristics and fits a specific job role. So that's kind of how it is, and it's just a science-based approach of assessing someone versus a more subjective assessment, if you like, Wayne.
Sure. And what sort of, in a way, objection or reticence have you had from organizations you've spoken with about applying this? Because it's clear that it's excellent, and I've seen it in action. Actually, for those of you on the call, I watched Hayk do a live demonstration of this in Luxor in front of an audience of people, where his technology scanned his face and told him his resting heart rate, I think something whether or not he was pre-diabetic. I'm watching this demonstration thinking this is like a serious risk, because if this goes wrong, this is remarkable, but it works. So the technology works. I'm just wondering what sort of pushback or reticence have you had from companies about this?
Yeah, so there's a couple. Firstly, the moment anyone hears, especially in Europe, about biometrics, they immediately get very defensive, thinking you're basically taking some very intimate something of theirs and you're going to abuse and scam, etc. This is obviously not true with us. Anyone who goes through an interview process volunteers to talk and obviously give their voice, give their video, give all the intimate information about themselves and their former employment to this company that doesn't promise or guarantee they're going to hire you, right? So if you think about it, context is such that you give a lot without expecting anything in exchange. All we have done is basically more accurately or more reliably assessed one part of it. And so of course, and there is always some disclaimers that says we're going to use your voice to assess certain capabilities, and people are completely fine with that, because when they go to an interview, they volunteer to speak, right? They're not mute, they're not silent. So us making it more explicit, of course, helps. They say, okay. And then they think about it and they say, oh, yeah, I mean, I'm speaking, so it's normal use as my voice. It's just instead of subjective personal assessment, you're going to have a technological assessment. In some cases, some companies also want to show the results to a person, because these are things that the person would like to know. Like, for example, if they say we're going to assess your personality, I would want to know that, right? I want to know what personality profile I have, regardless of if I'm getting a job or not. So in some ways, once there is that initial disclaimer, people are receptive, actually enthusiastic to want to know about themselves, if anything else.
It actually makes the process much fairer for both parties, doesn't it? It doesn't weight the favor of the hiring company rather than the candidate. It's interesting.
Yeah. And the other pushback, just in brief, is because a lot of HR companies, or I know you guys, you are from HR, there is a bit of a turf issue, right? So people like this one company, I'm not going to name, they basically were like, well, we have HR experts, and this is like a couple of hundred people company, and that's what they do. They source talent for larger companies. And while the CEO of this company said, oh, this is impressive, I said, well, how about we white label or provide basically technology for you to become more efficient, or your HR specialists become more efficient? It was like, no, we are HR specialists, are experts, we don't need this. And I said, well, okay, I'm not going to convince you this makes sense. But there is a lot of kind of a defensive feeling, because they realize how disruptive this could be to themselves. Of course, this is to amplify or make HR people more efficient. But initial reaction is always like, wow, this is, some people, of course, think this is going to replace them. And in theory, it could at some point, but this is not the purpose of this technology. This technology is built to make HR or recruitment process just a lot more efficient, and in ideal case, a lot shorter than 10 interviews. Imagine you can find out everything about the person that makes sense for the job in an interview of even 2 minutes, or a person speaking for 2 minutes. Would you like to go through getting 5 hours or 6 hours from different people whose time costs a lot of money? Instead of that cost, you just do 2 minutes and the technical assessment, and that's it. Imagine the cost savings, that they're significant or something like that.
It's actually remarkable, isn't it? When you really start to think, especially in the larger corporations, which have, we work with one of the big banks that are probably hiring anywhere between 9 to 12,000 people per year. So, and obviously that's outsourced to a large organization that does that, but they're not using anything like this technology, which is fascinating. Second thing, if I could ask you then, just to try and keep this, so we can hopefully have some time for some questions, because I'm sure this is hopefully going to generate some questions and thoughts from anyone dialed in, is its application of what you developed, thinking about this application with hiring, about what this means for managers and for leaders. I'm sure many of us, in my career, I've spent I'm 48 years old now, so I've been working for a while. But when I joined the sort of corporate world in the late 90s, and probably for the first 10 years of my corporate journey, I was subjected to all sorts of, whether it's a Myers-Briggs or whether I was now determined some sort of color. I'm now a square or a circle or a cat or a dog. You go through these insane sort of leadership assessment programs, and then people believe it. They believe I'm now this particular thing, and they play up to it. And also, unfortunately, it can become your personality, or even worse, I've seen this can be used by leaders to beat people up. So yeah, I knew it. I knew the guy was pink. I knew he was pink. That confirms everything to me, and actually it compounds the bias, and actually the inclusivity goes out the window. So I'm obviously painting like a stark picture here, but I think what you've developed and stumbled upon in your work has a huge implication for how we rethink the role of assessing qualities of managers and leaders.
Yeah, indeed. And I think, like you said, I think for example, for hiring process, you're looking for specific characteristics, and we have also things like job fit for marketing, customer service, etc. For managers and leadership, of course, the parameters based on which the assessment happens are slightly different. And again, before we go there, I think, like you said, the context is that you have Big Five or OSIAN, which is probably the most popular and used personality assessment, and Myers-Briggs, right, among others. There's some others. I mean, there's plenty of others. Most of them are between 30 or 40 years old in terms of being in the market. Now, the issue with this type of frameworks, which are assessing leadership skill or management skill of a person, is that a lot of them imply that you are a static person. And what does that mean? That means that, for example, if I take Big Five and I assess you, Wayne, if I assess you on a Big Five, which assesses openness, conscientiousness, agreeableness, extroversion, neuroticism, you're basically a person who is, let's say, if you're open, 7 out of 10, as an example, then you're open 7 out of 10 all the time. Now, this doesn't make sense, right? Again, you don't have to be a specialist to know that people are not all the time kind of static, fixed, solid things. Context makes all the difference. So what we have done is basically developed a framework that's context basically aware and assesses you based on your context in terms of specific characteristics that make sense for your leadership skill or your management skill, right? And for example, for leadership, we have up to like 10 parameters, which are the most important 10. Same thing for management, right? Top 10 parameters, which are the most important. And I think another important thing to mention is that, again, for most part, as you go up the ladder of that career, right? Think of this as a pyramid, junior, entry level, all the way to CEO, which is at the top of the pyramid. That non-technical assessment of people becomes more and more important, right? So when you go to CEO level or you go to VP level, big chunk of assessment, for example, IBM's leader doesn't have to have very hardcore technical skill, but he or she has to have team management, has to have strategy skill, has to have vision, has to have collaborativeness, certain things. All of this are we are able, or generally there is an ability to assess them. So that's what it is. I think when especially stakes are very high, right? When you're recruiting, for example, a leader or a manager, if this person is not the right fit, and we were just discussing this, right? A lot of people end up in wrong positions. If the person is not the right fit, his or her impact is going to be dramatically more than an individual contributor. Because imagine you're recruiting the wrong CEO for IBM or Microsoft, whatever company. You got the wrong person. This can tank the company. This can sink the company, right? So it's becoming crucial, and companies like Korn Ferry, etc., pay single or double digit thousands of dollars just to get a short list of this. Now, a company like us can come and say, well, instead of this, how about we technologically assess within a couple of minutes if the person fits the leadership job that he or she is being considered for, or the management job that he and she is being considered for, based on here's 10 parameters that are most critical for this job performance. So this is what it is. Again, there's a science behind it, and all we did is basically converge that science into technology. Mm-hmm.
If, for example, one of those attributes that the organization sees as desirable might be, I don't know, strategy. Let's just use that for example. I mean, is it possible that someone could develop their skill set or develop something? Because if this is measuring your voice or measuring your face, how can I score better in this thing? Because if this is going to be used as a measurement tool by the organization, it should give me a chance to be better at this.
Great. I think that's a really great question. So this is, I mean, if you think about it, when you're assessing someone on whatever skilled manager or leader initially, like when you're recruiting them, then a person has to, for example, doesn't rank high on, let's say, I don't know, for example, teamwork or learning ability, right? Which is critical for managers and leaders. What you can do is through courses, which by the way, you guys provide, Wayne, you
it's
can see
course.
how
it's a great course,
by the way. It's an amazing course called World Class Manager for a good reason. And then as you give trainings to your leadership teams, right, within the organization, you can measure along the way if people are improving on specific parameters. Because until now, what's the assessment, right? You give a training, but you don't really know if people improve. Then you have to wait until the training, maybe they'll do something, and then you have to indirectly figure out, is this person improved due to the training or not? It's a very kind of a subjective assessment. Yeah, I think he was doing better now. He's doing better before the training. So it becomes very much subjective at best, or not at all, right? There is no like feedback or mechanism to really assess if this person improved as a training as a result of that training, right? And trainings usually cost also a lot of money. So you don't even know if that's waste or actually improving your leadership or management team. So this allows you, for example, if you have a training of 12 months, it's 12 months, right? Your course, for example,
Yeah.
you can measure, for example, every month or every 3 months, if the people going through this training are improving on specific critical parameters related to their overall performance, right? Their personality or their behavior, etc. And you can see if there is progress or not, and you can take mitigating action along the training, not at the end when you've spent so much money, trained your team, then turns out 80% of the team actually is not hasn't improved or hasn't retained anything as a result, right?
I mean, it's a great point, right? Because you could be exercising, for example, in the wrong way, even though you think you're doing the right thing. You're going to the gym regularly, but then you sort of, I had this recently. I met with I don't have a like personal trainer, but I had a session. I was on holiday and I had a training session with a personal trainer for like 15 minutes. And I was aching like hell for the rest of the day. Whereas, I wouldn't usually feel that way leaving the gym, but I was definitely doing things in the wrong way, suboptimal. And there was no check in place, right? So I think that's a really valuable way to, again, look at how you would then help the individual to improve, because that's what we want the individual to do.
And I think one thing to add to this, and this is super critical, you can probably ask, and you're asking in your head, how come all the systems, the Myers-Briggs and Oceans, etc., still persist if Hayk or anyone else claims they are not accurate? They're at best 20-30% accurate. The reason, guys, is because a lot of the systems, as I said, not only they are static, but there's no negative or positive feedback from the companies that hire. No one gets fired because at the recruitment stage they were hired using Ocean or Big Five, and 6 months down the road, someone found out that you are not 7 out of 10 being open, or you're neurotic 3 out of 10 versus 2 out of 10. No one gets fired for this. So this nice, very compelling, intuitive, or logical, if you like, framework, whether that's Big Five, or they persist because they seem logical, they're intuitive, anyone non-specialist can understand it, and yet no one really checks, are they effective, are they accurate? They are not. But because of lack of negative feedback, they perpetuate themselves. And it's like, of course, logical. HR wants to use something. This makes sense. Or so, because everyone uses them, so we use them too. Never mind that there's no real actual feedback to show that systems are not very accurate, right? Just so you know.
Yeah, totally. And then what about the sort of, I guess the third area is then looking at the impact on performance and on the team's performance. So the third area that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about was how we look at this for optimizing teams. I mean, it's one of the, I was with an organization yesterday and the day before talking largely about this link between organizational strategy and what this means for the individual. Leaders understand the strategy. It makes sense to them. They often get some time to spend in a nice hotel for a day or two. They drink nice drinks, eat nice food, they play golf, they have fun together, and they emerge after 2 days with a consensus. Then they struggle to figure out, why is everybody else not understanding the consensus that makes obvious sense to us? Well, because often they designed it in a certain way. The next level down gets a fuller summary. The next level down gets a brief. The rest of the people kind of get not much other than some words, or maybe there's something. But there is a natural disconnect in many organizations between how the leadership team understands strategy, what it means for the individual. What we figured out in our journey, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but I definitely agree that there is no IQ difference between what we find at the senior end of the organization or at the junior end. So it's not about intelligence, it's more about context. So the people at the top often have, or not the top, close to the center, have exceptional context. They get it, they understand it. The people who are in theory in the most junior roles could also understand it well enough, but they never get an opportunity to understand it. So, if you're in my team and we're both not very junior in the organization, it's rare that I would say, Hayk, how do you feel about going out and getting a sandwich for lunch and talking about the strategy and what it means for our teams? Like, no, Wayne, no, thank you. But we know it's an important conversation to have because it's the exact conversation leadership teams have. And then the reason why the leadership team often makes more sense in terms of their performance is because it's easier to link what I should be doing day to day because I understand why I'm doing it, the strategy. Most other people have no link to that. So I'm interested in this link between, we know that we want the organizational strategy to be developed and delivered. We know that we want every individual to, when we talk about performance, it's, ultimately it's delivery, isn't it? It's delivery of something in accordance with what the overall strategy was. Problem is, most managers and most teams don't understand necessarily what is required of them because it's not clear. And no one really understands what the goal is. And we can prove this, again, in so much data we've got. So I'm interested in how what you've developed and what you're working on could be used to help optimize team performance. Because ultimately for the individual, if I can make sure that I do a better job, I'm going to get paid more, I'm going to get opportunities for promotion, development, and so on. So I think this is a huge game changer for the individual and how that might work.
Yeah, no, I think there's no organization, we can assume there's no organization that doesn't want their teams to perform better, right? And performing better, like you said, it has to do with a number of things, starting from the top and then trickling down to the bottom. So performance assessment, if you think of someone's performance, there's a couple of ingredients, right? Communication, definitely up or down, right? Plays a big role in it. And let's assume everyone is an expert, or like, let's say people in specific positions have the subject matter expertise that they're supposed to have. What really happens is that, like you say, one thing that I was thinking of when you were talking is that firstly, from the top to down, the way to communicate has to be specifically catered to different functions, right? This is not something normally a leader considers, right? They have their own way of doing it. For example, and they just communicate it down, and they think or hope is, I think, the way to describe this. They hope that it's being perceived and trickled further down. The problem is that modality of communication makes a big difference. I mean, as an example, right? A lot of people are visual thinkers. There are people who are kinesthetic. There are people who are more audio thinkers, or a mix. Knowing, for example, what modality your group or most of the team thinks makes a difference. So we can assess that, right? We can assess, for example, communication skill of a person, what's the percentage and how it can be improved. The other thing is, and this is also very important, is the mental or cognitive well-being or burnout or emotional stability of specific teams, right? Of individuals. Like there's more and more research, and I'm sure a lot of you already know this as much as I do, that employee well-being is becoming more important because it's not some sort of a abstract kind of siloed thing. It's because everyone is concerned about specific team performances and individual performances. For example, teams that are more burned out or jaded, for whatever reason, they are not as performant. They can be consisting of amazing, incredible A players, and they are still not performant. So the idea is that communication is one, but then once something is understood, let's assume it's understood and the task is there, and the team perform. How would you know if the team can perform? Currently, the HR managers, the best they can do is they can have some sort of a quiz to assess their well-being, or people come and self-report, I'm burned out, or I don't like my manager, I don't understand why are we doing what we're doing. So there are solutions that can basically help assess whether different team members and the team overall are, for example, what's the burnout level, what's the emotional stability level, is there a stress level? Is it exceeding a specific threshold after which a lot of people are not going to be performant? Are there, for example, team members who have depression, right? This all, again, without being a specialist, you know intuitively that if a person has depression, he can be the most amazing A player, he's not going to perform well or not perform at all. So this suddenly, if you like, you're putting in glasses and suddenly you can see a lot about your team members. And if you know what individual team members have, you also know how to potentially address those different things, right? If you're seeing someone is very stressed and he or she is, for example, a team lead, then you can have some sort of a mitigation strategy, for example, meditation or yoga or whatever else that the company has to release the stress and to have this person, without even him or her realizing it, to perform better as a result of what you've done. But before you know how to solve a problem, you have to know even what the problem is. So performance, in brief way, breaks down into specific components, right? From my perspective, and I'm no big specialist in this, but basically one is obviously communication, the modalities of communication, which could be assessed and optimized. That's one. Second part of this is just cognitive kind of a framework of a lot of the teams. This two, I think, alone can make a big difference already. Again, this is not the exhaustive list. There's some other things that, of course, we don't have the time now to go in, but if you can figure out the team kind of level of cognitive well-being or mental well-being, and if you can communicate in very specific ways and make sure that people understood, and of course, on top of that, you can also understand, for example, if people are loyal. So there's a way of assessing if the person is, for example, about to churn or is loyal or etc., or is innovative, etc. And then based on individual feedback, like individual parameters like this, you can fine-tune how to address this team, what would make this team resonate with whatever vision that your strategy you have, and how this team can perform or execute that strategy that just came from the top much more, like, significantly better versus the kind of the blind way of saying, here it is, I mean, I'm exaggerating. Of course, there's a lot of trainings and there's all hands, etc. But at the end of the day, it becomes, here's the strategy, here's how you have to execute it, but there isn't really a way of figuring out if the team can or should or will execute it, right? At the end of the day, it's all assumed to be the case.
Wow. So imagine the implications for, if you're a VC or private equity firm and you're going to buy a business. I mean, wouldn't it be amazing if you could get a read of the organizational culture and what you're actually buying into? Because, this would never be taken into account in the due diligence process. Maybe there'd be some sort of cultural survey or assessment tool, but nothing like this, nothing that's as detailed as this to be able to say, if I'm going to invest X million in this business, what's the likelihood I'm going to get my return? I'm sure that has a lot to do, as we all already know, with the culture, with the management quality, with the performance of the individuals, which you can probably tell using the tech.
Yeah, exactly. So I think what we have seen, by the way, is exactly what you're saying. We have seen a number of startups now, a few VCs that we're working with. They are assessing basically founders on exactly some of these parameters, because founders of especially smaller companies are the most important people, at least from a VC perspective. If you're seeing, for example, the founder being burned out, which is very, very common, by the way, then you want to either mitigate it or you try and understand what level of burnout the founder is. Then there is a red flag or a risk of investing in this company, because they can, again, have an amazing everything, the product, the traction, etc. But what really happens is if you invest in a founder and 3 months down the road, he or she goes missing in action or completely disappears and goes offline, what happens then? Not just for small companies, but basically any senior management leadership team assessment like this, when you're, for example, about to partner up, I think could make a lot of sense, because then you can, again, put like your glasses, your X-ray glasses, or whatever you want to call it. Suddenly you can see who you are dealing with, and then you know how to deal with them. Or if there is a problem, then at least you will consider, the problem before you decide to go all in or do some whatever action that you're intending to do.
Yeah. Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I can sort of now see a stock market index of scores here of what you should or shouldn't invest in. This is brilliant. So just conscious of time, and we'd love to, if there are any questions, we'd love obviously to pose them either to myself or predominantly to Hayk. So please feel free to drop any questions through, and we've got one of the team on the line to pick those out. Could we also try and get can we get Hayk's email address back on the screen again? Because you can see his email address to contact him directly, and also you can see their web address at InsightGenie.ai if you want to check out the website. So please feel free to, of course, check that out. So if we don't have any questions, then we'll move on. But we do have a question. I think we do have a question coming in. I think we see this Hayk the same time everyone else sees it. So let's go for it. So David, thank you, David. I'm no expert on this. Seems interesting, but does use of AI fall under the emotion recognition system biometrics used to infer states of intentions, i.e. is more strictly controlled because it's considered high risk, permissible to use under strict conditions? Wow. Well, that's for you.
No, so this is a good question. Thanks, David. So I'm not sure if this is in European context. It might be in a European context. So emotional assessment, by the way, is something that we can provide as well. We are not normally. Emotional assessment can be done using Google or pretty much any main, like Amazon, IBM. Everyone has emotional assessment. Now, within the context of whether that's recruitment or leadership or management or employee performance, we are not doing it. The reason we are not doing it is because emotions, I'm not going to say they're very temporary or very short term, because you're doing basically a screenshot, right? At any time when, whether that's recruitment or leadership assessment or performance, you're doing a screenshot of a person at that moment. Emotions stand on the top of the assessment, right? What you're really trying to assess is the character, the behaviors, the personality of the person, which goes deeper and is more fundamental. Because I might be on this day, for example, something happens or I'm having a bad day, but I still have an interview. I go there and you're assessing me, and I happen to be very sad. I'm very down. Does that say a lot about me generally? Maybe, maybe not. But normally, again, emotions are more volatile in that sense, and hence we are less reliant on them and more reliant on more fundamental things about your behavior and your personality. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There is basically it is still considered biometrics, and it is obviously also something that a company has to be aware of. Because if, for example, the same person goes through multiple stages and turns out the emotion of this person is persistently throughout multiple days and multiple interview stages is, for example, sad, you want to know about this. So we have a capability that can provide something like that, but it's not, again, like you said, there are specific kind of a concerns about this. So we are kind of trying to bypass it. For that, plus the fact that they're more volatile than anything else, more fundamental we're providing.
Awesome. Very cool. I think we've got another couple of questions. So from Callum, this sounds fascinating. However, I'm interested to understand more about how this tool has specifically been proven to be better than the existing models.
Okay, perfect.
Great, Callum. Thank you.
No, thanks, Callum. I think this is also a great point. So I'm going to spare you any sales pitches, just tell you that we have now a number of clients, everything from construction companies. So construction company, the use case is recruitment of construction workers, right? And think of it not just construction, think of it any kind of more, like less or low income level, like Deliveroo, Uber, etc. They have high churn, high turnover of people kind of by design, right? So a lot of these companies have huge costs associated to it, construction including, and they want to decrease the churn and hire more reliable kind of people. So we have a case with a large company, for example, in the Philippines, doing basically, they had 60% churn every second week. So they would hire, imagine they would hire a couple of hundred people every week, every week, just so they can keep up the project development, the construction project. With us, within 2 or 3 months, if I recall correctly, it went to practically zero churn. Which is interesting. So they stopped using it at one point. They would use only for new projects. And we went back to them and said, how come you're not using it? They said, your system is so accurate that we don't have to constantly use it. We just hire people and they stay. It's like a curse in disguise, not a blessing in disguise. We have one of the cases we have is the largest job portal in Bangladesh, right? This company provides hundreds of, I think around 100,000 job interviews for companies inside the country, everything from bottom, like entry level to the C level, right? So again, completely different characteristics that you're using to assess people on let's say, entry level financial analyst versus a CEO of a company, but the principle remains. You're doing assessment of a person based on parameters that make sense on a seniority level of that person, right? So it's been proven, let's say, in the market in terms of working and efficiency, etc. And that's why we're still kind of in business and doing this. Hopefully
Awesome.
that gave you some more color.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Hayk. And I think we've got time for one last question from Ian. So it's much more accurate and reliable personality test. Does it then provide guidance on what to do with this increased insight?
Yeah, great question. So it is more reliable and accurate than personality tests. The guidance part is an additional part. So first part is to even provide the insights. I mean, our expertise is in behavioral neurosciences, right? And you see, I've never mentioned the word AI. There's a lot of AI in this, but I'm not mentioning it because it's not some sort of a big competitive advantage here. What's advantage is using behavioral neurosciences and assess people using human science, basically, assessing humans using human science. So the insights and recommendations are something that we could provide, on any potential behavioral scientist or anyone who is an expert or specialist in this could provide as well. But this is a step 2 for us, right? So we do provide on ad hoc basis to some of the companies, but this is not something we do by default, because even providing insights themselves is more than sufficient for people to even intuitively know that if the person, for example, is not very open, okay, that means something, right? Again, we are able to provide, but we're especially focused on the insights part first, if I can say it like that.
Yeah, brilliant. And then also, of course, please feel free to reach out to Hayk directly. We have his email address, so please feel free to reach out. Just a huge thank you so much. It's so generous of you to share these insights. I'm constantly blown away, I think, in our conversations about the applications of this. And the more that I think this through, just like with the conversation today, as I've been learning, as hopefully many of you have been learning, I think the applications of what you're developing, and I'm sure what many others are developing, right? If you're developing stuff like this, there's others that are working on this too, and it presents an interesting set of opportunities and challenges for the way that we hire, the way we develop, and the way that we drive performance as well. So a huge thank you. For any questions that we've not had a chance to answer, we'll do those probably offline. But Hayk, before we wrap up, any final thoughts, any final word from you?
No, I think what I wish, right? If you want, I wish if I had a Harry Potter magic wand or something like this. I wish, again, regardless of us, I mean, this field is going to develop, and I'm not the one to prognosticate or forecast anything, but I wish more companies or more HR teams use more science-based approaches versus something that is logical and simple, but unfortunately or fortunately not very accurate at the end of the day. So science is coming more and more into HR, and you will see more HR tech companies using kind of more scientific way of assessing people. whether that's leadership or at the initial recruitment stage or employee well-being. I just wish more of them are aware and think of this as something that can really make you more accurate or more efficient as a leader or as an employee in HR, whether you're at the HR company, rather than feeling like this is some like big scary thing that we should stay away. It's inevitably coming. Better is that if you educate yourself about it and use it within the context of your company, basically. That's my wish.
Yeah, for sure. Great, absolutely great wish. And one of the things we run polls regularly on LinkedIn, and one of the polls that I ran recently was asking the question: AI still interested by it or bored by it? And the majority of people responded bored by it. And I don't think it's bored by it because they're actually bored of it, but because they kind of put it in the camp of don't understand it, too much to get my head around, I'm going to ignore it. And it's actually just annoying because all I hear all the time is AI, future of AI, too much. But the challenge is it's not stopping. And unless we're ahead of it, then we're going to be behind it, right? So it's important to be ahead of it as much as possible, which of course is why your session today is so valuable for all of us, I'm sure. So again, a huge thank you to Hayk, and we look forward to seeing you on the next live stream, which is going to be in July. And we're going to be interviewing someone very senior from a financial regulator outside of the UK. So stay tuned for that. And again, a huge thank you for your time, Hayk, today. See you soon.
Thanks, Claude. It's been a pleasure, and thanks for amazing questions. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care. Bye.